Hi, everyone, and welcome to our very first virtual Rocket Boys Festival. I'm Burke Allen in Washington, D.C., and special thanks to our sponsors, Theater West Virginia. Also, special thanks to our tech support team from Headline Books. And we have 3 days full of interesting sessions that folks can chime in and participate in from all over the country, all over the world, which is one of the upsides to doing this event virtually. It's taken place for the past 20 years back in southern West Virginia. But now we're scattered all over the country, and we're able to bring everyone together. If you have questions or comments, we're simulcasting both on Facebook Live and YouTube, and you can send your questions into us at Facebook and YouTube, and we would be happy to post them to all the folks that are participating in our sessions. Later today, we have a writer's workshop with Homer Hickam and other best-selling authors. We also have a special session about the movie October Sky, and we have cast members from that film reuniting today during our special virtual Rocket Boys Festival. They're getting up early in Hollywood to join us, so be sure you're here for that. That's at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. But right now, we want to kick things off and bring onto the screen the author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, Rocket Boys, Homer Hickam, and also from Colwood, West Virginia, Homer's best buddy back in the day, Roy Lee Cook. So let's see if we can get both those guys into our very first ever virtual Rocket Boys Festival. Homer, are you there in Rocket City, USA? Can you hear me?
Hey there, Burke. I can hear you loud and clear, and it's great to participate in this first virtual Rocket Boys festival. This when I heard about it, I thought, hey, this is going to be kind of fun. I just get to stay home and participate, and maybe folks from around the world can participate as well. I hear from folks every day in India and Brazil and China and everywhere. So it's kind of cool that we can now open this up really across the planet.
You know, we did the Rocket Boys Festival in person for 20 years. It seemed like a nice round number, and wrapped it up there at the Beckley Exhibition Coal Mine last year. And joining you, Homer, at that event, and joining us live from his home is Rocket Boy Roy Lee Cook. Roy Lee, are you there?
I am here. And by here, I mean I'm in South Carolina today.
Fantastic. Roy, I want to start with you in our conversation about the Rocket Boys phenomenon, and I want to go back to those days in Colwood. Do you remember the first time you met young Sonny Hickam and what the circumstances were around that?
I do remember that. And we were actually in the first grade, and our teacher was Miss Williams. I had to walk all of maybe a half mile to school, and Sonny was a couple, 3 doors above me. So we met there at school and immediately had a bonding because as Hickam will remember, we started a newspaper together.
Now, Homer, you've talked about this newspaper, and you ran afoul of a community leader when you started this newspaper in high school. But for the folks who are watching, and some are watching live, many more will watch after the fact, can you recount the story of this Colwood newspaper that you and Roy Lee worked on?
Yeah, let me back up though just a little bit. Roy Lee lived about 3 doors down from me there in Colwood, a place called the Substation. Colwood had a number of quote unquote suburbs, kind of like they were all company houses built up and down the hollows there. But our hollow was called Substation because there was a great big substation across from our house that hummed 24 hours a day. And I don't think we ever noticed it till we went away and came back. And it's like, how in the world did we live through this? But anyway, I met Roy Lee, even though he's a few doors down. We probably seen each other, but we didn't really play together until the first grade. He immediately got me in trouble, as he does. I forget what it was. I think he pushed me head first down the slide or something. I don't know. But anyway, in the 3rd grade, actually, it was that we started our own newspaper, and it was a big success, sort of, kind of, until we charged a scrip penny. Scrip was the was the currency there in Colwood. The company actually produced its own money, and a script penny looked like a small U.S. federal penny, except it had a triangular hole in it, and said Olga Coal Company on it, or Carter Coal Company, whatever the company was at the time. And anyway, so we charged a script penny, and it was worth it because we had to hand print it. It took us a while to do each issue. But yeah, I ended up writing a story about this lady who chased a snake into the creek and fell down, and it was a crawdad bit her, and it was really, really funny. And everybody thought, oh, that was the funniest story they ever read. But the problem was that lady was my mom. And Mom took away my First Amendment rights until until the end of time, and so she didn't care anything about the Constitution. So it's like, okay, that's it. The Colwood News is hereby abolished. So that's kind of the story on that.
Roy Lee, we're going to do a full session with you later on at Virtual Rocket Boys Festival about what made Colwood special and that town special. But one of the things that struck me about all of you, having done the festival there and seen so many people come back and their warm memories of Colwood, was it seemed that education was at a real premium there in that little town in southern West Virginia in the 1950s, to a point that might surprise people. And I wonder if that's me looking at it through rose-colored glasses, or was the education really strong back then?
Well, Burke, I think it was. It seemed that all of our parents wanted us to better ourselves in the future. And of course, the easiest way to do that was to make sure that you got your high school education, your diploma, and go into college. Not all of us went to college, but a significant number of us from Big Creek High School went on to college and get degrees. I'm very proud of that fact. And it seems to me that even in the town, growing up in the first, second, third, fifth grade, there was conversation about what was going to happen in the future. If you study the history a little bit, we started school about the time that we started seriously testing nuclear weapons. We'd already dropped the bomb on Japan, but we were developing a great horde of nuclear weapons. We were afraid of things that were happening overseas still, even though we won the war and was winning a second war. People were just concerned about communism and meeting our country. And how do you fight it? You fight it with technology and book learning, as they would refer to back then. So yes, I do think that education was very, very strong in Colwood.
I'm sure that folks who are watching, many of them have read Rocket Boys. I mean, the book was a New York Times #1 bestseller over 20 years ago, which is amazing. And then there was that movie that did very, very well about it. But Homer, from your own words and your own recollection, Sputnik played a pivotal role in your childhood. And I wonder if you can sort of look back at young Sonny in 1957 and what the world was like and what really inspired you about that historic event.
Yeah, one thing to remember about the 1950s, especially the mid 1950s, right before Sputnik, is that's also known as the golden age of science fiction. So we had Robert Heinlein, whose stories we were reading. Again, we were big readers there in Colwood, and we had a well-stocked school library, and most of our parents had book of the month clubs and all that kind of thing. So we read Heinlein, we read Isaac Asimov. Of course, we went back and read Jules Verne, and so we were kind of primed, without realizing it, for this big event that was about to happen over in Russia, or as the Soviet Union, as we called it then. And that was the idea that we would, people would eventually go into space. But honestly, we thought it was a century away before there would be a satellite in orbit. And certainly people in space was way, way out in the future. So in 1957, Roy Lee and I were in high school. It was our first year in high school, and it started in the 10th grade then over at Big Creek High School. We came in from Colwood. We'd read all these books. We actually had television back then. I know that people find that difficult to believe, but we did. And I think Roy Lee got a TV before I did. Used to go watch Friday Night Wrestling. But we also had Tom Corbett and the Space Cadets and Rod Brown, the Rocket Rangers, all these silly TV shows for kids. But anyway, we were primed. So without realizing that, and then all of a sudden the Russians launched Sputnik, and that was the world's first Earth satellite. It scared most of the people in the United States to death because, just like Roy said, we were worried about the Russians coming over and blowing us up with atomic bombs and so on. And so most of the folks and the adults anyway in the United States were very concerned about this. And but for us kids, we kind of took it two ways. One was, yeah, it's kind of scary, but on the other hand, hey, we're in space, and we're actually in space as people, and looks like the United States is going to respond. And we've got a space race going on here, and we've got a space age going on here. So it got to be very, very exciting for a lot of us. Our school curriculum totally changed the next year. It went a lot more toward what they call STEM now. And so it was really a revolution in the United States and across the world, especially for young people.
This is a conversation with the Rocket Boys, Homer Hickam and Roy Lee Cook, part of our first ever virtual Rocket Boys Festival. And we're going to put some pictures up on the screen for folks. And I want to get some comments from Roy Lee and Homer as well, as we sort of take you back to Coalwood in 1957. And you guys both graduated from Big Creek in 1960. And so we want to get sort of a look at what that town was like. There were company houses in many of those coal camp towns. And Roy Lee, it's my understanding, and this was a little before my time, that the houses were still standing in West Virginia. But as Homer alluded to, you were paid with script, and these towns were very self-sufficient on their own. Is that right?
Especially Coalwood. You have to look back and find out that we had a bakery. We had our own newspaper at one time. We had several different ball fields in different parts of the suburbs, as Sonny calls them. And of course, Coalwood Junior High School. All these things played a part in our lives. And we were far ahead, I think, of most of the coal mining camps in southern West Virginia. And that's not to throw off on Logan, of course, but we felt like that we were not only self-sufficient, but that we were better than a lot of other communities. We had sidewalks, for goodness sakes. And that picture that was shown just a moment ago with those houses and that muddy looking area, that probably goes back to around 1915 or 1920 at the latest, because there were streets and roads all through the town, even going down towards Snake Root and Frog Level and places like that. You had hard surface roads. So,
hold on a second. What were the names of those areas again? Snake Root and Frog Level.
And that's true. And by the way, those names preceded even Mr. Carter bringing the coal company into Coalwood in Coretta. Those are on maps that go back to the early 1880s. And how they got Snake Root, I don't even know what a Snake Root is. And Frog Level, my Lord. And there was also another one, my favorite, Mud Hole. You know? I
Homer
didn't
Hickam, Roy Lee Cook are joining
know.
us today, and this
And
is
I
the
thought at
virtual
first
Rocket
that
Boys
picture-
Festival. Homer, on the screen right now is one. There have been several covers of the book Rocket Boys, but on this particular book cover, there is a photo, and it's in the mountains. I'm assuming that is in Coalwood. What is in that picture?
Yeah, Burke, what's in that picture is actually taken from the Olga Coal Company #1 tipple, looking back toward the valley where the houses, the company houses, were built. The big house is called the Captain's House. That was originally for Captain Laird, who was the original mine superintendent there. He called Captain. He was a World War I hero. During the Rocket Boys era, though, I lived in that house with my mom, my dad, my older brother, and a squirrel named Chipper. and also, you know, the usual couple of cats and dogs and such. So it was a privilege to live in that big house. But all the houses, not all, but most of the houses in Coalwood were fairly spacious, and they were all well built. Mr. Carter brought in carpenters from Wales. So they were very sturdy. He also brought in stonemasons from Italy. So Mr. Carter and Captain Laird had in mind of building a model mining town, and in a way that they did. I think the interesting thing about the Rocket Boys era in the late 1950s was all of that was starting to fall apart. The company had been sold a couple of times, and Mr. Carter and the captain had gone away. And so Roy Lee and I could see, and all the kids really could see, that the Coalwood that we knew was dying. And that was another reason our parents were so interested in having us get out. But growing up there was a good thing. I think that most of us kids enjoyed the freedom that we had. Those mountains, and on that cover you can see back behind there, I knew them. Roy Lee and I, we just knew every path up there, every rock and everything. We played up there all the time, and so it was that freedom that we had, I think, is kind of cascaded down through our life, that we feel like we can go out and do anything.
If you're interested in the history of Coalwood, there was a documentary film made about Coalwood, Welcome to Coalwood, by a Minneapolis school teacher who brought his students in for many years to the festival. His name is Steve Date, and we'll talk with Steve in one of the future sessions on the virtual Rocket Boys Festival. It's happening all this week, today, Wednesday, and Thursday, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, simulcast on Facebook Live and YouTube, and of course will be archived so you can watch later on. But if you're interested in the history of Coalwood, you can find out even more about it then. Roy Lee, I wonder what it's like for you after all these years to have reestablished friendships with your childhood buddies because of the success of this book and then the subsequent movie.
Well, I will tell you this. About the time that my friend Sonny let me know about the book and the movie coming out, I was looking at a second or third retirement. I had already gotten my lifelong fishing and hunting license. I was ready to settle down, and all of a sudden I'm cast into the spotlight again, along with my friends. I had not seen some of them in years and years when the book came out, and it changed my life forever. I don't know what it did for Billy and Jimmy and Quentin, and it's obvious that for Sonny, it cast him into advance his writing career. But for me, it was a new awakening. I decided I would not retire, that I would continue on with the things that interest me, and I'm still doing that. But to be able to see all those old friends that I spent mostly 12 years with going to school was just an enlightenment to me. And many of them, as we will talk about, many of them have had great successes in their careers.
Homer, first of all, I have to tell you, I get a kick out of the fact that Roy Lee refers to you as Sonny. I wonder if everyone from Coalwood still calls you Sonny, and everyone after that calls you Homer. Is that how that works?
Yeah, pretty much. I was Sonny, of course, right on through high school and partly into college. In college, I picked up the nickname Flash. I don't really want to go into that. And then,
all kinds are wrong.
No, it's nothing like you think. But I know how you think. But when I went in the Army and over in Vietnam, I decided the Sonny just didn't work, trying to lead men into battle. So I became Homer over there, been Homer. So most people beyond that know me as Homer, but either way, I answered to either one. And I love the nickname Sonny. Sonny was a great nickname to have. So yeah.
Well, tell me about the photos that we see on the screen now as part of our virtual Rocket Boys Festival. And let's start with the one in the upper left, that black and white photo. Who's in that picture? And tell me about what you remember about that photo and that day.
Well, that photo came about because of the newspaper over in high school decided that they heard about us building these rockets, boys over in Colwood, and they wanted to have a newspaper article about it. So the picture for the article was taken by my mom, and you can see it was a snowy day in the winter, and that's me holding this mock-up of a rocket. It's not a real rocket. It was one that Quentin and I were kind of studying what fins should look like and how they'd be attached and so on. So, well, as you can see, it was called OC-5B, and we named our rockets after a bird that couldn't fly. We had kind of a sense of humor about that. So I'm standing here holding this rocket, and then that's Quentin beside me. And God bless Quentin. Quentin passed away last year, and we really miss him. And yeah, thank goodness that we had him as a member of the Rocket Boys. He was kind of the brains behind everything, or at least we hoped that he knew what he was doing. And then that's Roy Lee holding this device that we were using actually for a smaller rocket to go down in the middle to kind of stabilize it as it took off. And we ultimately went to just a steel rod and with an attachment to that. But that was our first try for stabilization at takeoff. And that's Jimmy Odell Carroll with his hand on that device. As you can see, they've got Roy Lee and Odell have these really fancy hats. I'm not quite sure where they got that from. Probably Myrtle Beach would be my guess. And so yeah, that's what that's all about.
Roy Lee, the photo right next to the black and white up in the top, it looks like you and the Rocket Boys received West Virginian of the Year awards, and I wonder what you can tell me about those two gentlemen beside you. Homer, of course, is on the right, but the fellas on the left. Tell me about Odell Carroll and Billy Rose.
I don't know who those people are. Billy and Jimmy are probably as different as day and night. Billy's a very serious graduate engineer who takes life very seriously, very, very seriously. Jimmy, on the other hand, takes nothing seriously. But they both are successful in their own ways, and both are dear friends of ours. And we were very sorry that they were unable to be with us today, but they are quite unique in their own individual way.
Homer, when you guys first got together for the first Rocket Boys Festival, right after the book and the movie came out, I wonder how similar and how different you, in your estimation, the personalities of the Rocket Boys were from what you remember as a kid. Were they adult versions of themselves? Were they completely different? What was it like when you got the band back together, as it were?
Well, I think it's kind of funny. It's like a high school reunion in a way. Everybody reverts to their roles in high school. Suddenly, even though they may be presidents of their companies and have young wives, beautiful wives, suddenly they're over there in the nerd corner, and the cheerleaders are with the cheerleaders, and the majorettes are with the majorettes, and so on. So I had, it's just that way. When we got back together, it was like we'd never been apart. Really, it was just amazing. And of course, during the Rocket Boys era, we had known each other for a long, long time, except for Quentin, who didn't live in Colwood. We didn't know him till high school. So we were very close then. And even though we hadn't been together that much after high school till the Rocket Boys thing happened, we just had so much in common that we wanted to share about what had happened in our lives since we'd seen each other. But really, it was almost like a day had not passed. It was interesting. An interesting dynamic.
if you happen to be watching from wherever you are in the world to our virtual Rocket Boys Festival and you have a question you'd like to send in, just message us to it, message it to us on Facebook Live, and we'll be happy to pose it to Homer Hickam and Roy Lee Cook, two of the original Rocket Boys. And for many people, winning the National Science Fair and having this incredible event happen to them would be, a capstone of a great life. But Homer, after Colwood, you went on to Virginia Tech to study engineering, and then you were shipped off to Vietnam. And I wonder if you can tell me about this picture and where you were and what you remember when this was taken.
Well, I actually volunteered for Vietnam. I never got a lot of credit for being smart, and but I was a lieutenant, and I was thinking about maybe making the Army a career, and I was stationed out in Utah, and kind of in a remote place, and I decided I wanted to see something of the world. So where the Army was offering the world was a place called Vietnam. So it turned out to be a pretty rough place. But this picture was taken toward the end of my tour in Vietnam, down in a place called Ban Me Tuot, and it's up in the mountains, the Central Highlands. And we basically put our tents up in a great big mud hole, and a lot of people went down with malaria and everything else there. We were being tracked by a North Vietnamese regiment that we knew we were going to get hit before it was over. But that picture, for me, is most interesting. The two people that are shown, Sergeant Vadrine over in the right, eating a meal out of this sea rations can, and you can barely make him out. But the other person in there is our dog Short Round, and Short Round followed us around all over Vietnam, up in the Central Highlands, and he was a great mascot. His brother Smokey was killed actually in action, but so that's what that picture is all about.
Did you ever think about writing books about your time in Vietnam?
I have thought about it, Burke, and I've put it off for a long time because I can't figure out how to write a memoir about being in Vietnam and telling it from my point of view without it making me look like I was a hero or something, which I wasn't. The guys that didn't come back, they were the only heroes in Vietnam, as far as I'm concerned. But I am going to be writing the next memoir is about some of the things that happened after the Rocket Boys era. So I will include some stories about Vietnam.
Homer Hickam and Roy Lee Cook are our guests today. It's a conversation with the Rocket Boys in the inaugural session of our virtual Rocket Boys Festival. Roy Lee, you see the guy on the left there, Sonny Hickam, as you remember, but what do you remember, taking away the mythology and the book and the movie, what do you remember about the National Science Fair and you boys getting ready to do that whole thing? What do you recall after all these years about that whole thing?
A couple of things. Number one, I think about Ms. Riley, because she was the one that put us in the direction that led up to the National Science Fair. She convinced us that this was more than a hobby. This was more than just a game, that we had to put our minds together and take on county and regional science fairs and mathematics contests and things of that sort. The second thing, I really would have liked to have gone with my friend Homer to the science fair, but it just was not to happen. There was only enough money. There's only so much that we could do, and we accepted it. And but in looking back, I'll say, if I had been there, would they have stolen that rocket? No, because we would have divided the time up and we would have watched that thing 24 hours a day.
In your vantage point, Roy Lee, who did what in the building of those original rockets? You all had your own assignments. Who was the brains of the operation? Who was the procurement officer? Who did what in all that?
Well, as he said, Quentin was certainly the brains of the operation, but very closely behind Quentin was Billy Rose. They were both very, very smart, and in fact, their characters are combined into the movie. Procurement. let's think about that term a little bit. There were things that we needed that we did not have exact contact with. We didn't have the ability to get. And I don't think that I could use as a defense that Sonny made me do it. But I would make little forays into the company's storage houses to get certain things that we needed to build rockets. We just didn't seem to have at our disposal the things we needed every time we built a rocket. And as you probably know, we had a lot of failures with our rockets. So it was difficult to take those used rockets and don't use them again. But I was a procurement officer.
The truth comes out.
The truth comes out. One of the things that I did that I'm sort of proud of was I held a camera in a couple of times. And in the movie, you'll see a rocket go squiggly across the sky. Well, what happened was I went out to take some film of the rocket on its pad. And I suspect it was Jimmy Carroll, but someone fired the rocket. And I rolled over on my back and I followed the rocket across the sky with the camera. And I thought that film was gone forever until I saw it again in the movie. And I'm so glad that Miss Elsie took care of that for us.
I love that. And if you haven't seen the movie in a while, be sure to watch at the very end. The end credits are incredible. There's also on some of the DVDs sort of a walk back through time there in Colwood that features Homer and the other Rocket Boys. Homer, there's some photos here of your career after Vietnam. You went to work in the space industry. You actually were able to realize that childhood dream that was sparked by Miss Riley and your friendship with the other Rocket Boys. Can you quickly walk us through those photos that we see on the screen from the top left?
Yeah, top left is some of the divers that worked including me. I'm there beside the Molly there in the red dress. And we worked in the neutral buoyancy simulator. It's 40 feet deep, 75 feet across, big tank of water where we train the astronauts to work in spacesuits. In the lower right-hand corner, that's actually me in the spacesuit, EMU suit as it's called, going into it to test out some of the procedures before the astronauts came up and told us how ignorant we were. It showed us how a better way to do it. But anyway, we would test all the procedures before they came. Interesting is I think is the cartoon in the top middle. That is of the Spacelab J crew. That was the first Japanese astronauts into orbit and some American astronauts as well. Cartoon for our crew and also the people who talked to them on the ground. I was one of them. What they called a crew interface coordinator. We had Mae Jemison on that flight. Mae was the first Black American woman in space. Jan Davis and Mark Lee, and Hoot Gibson. And so we had a great crew. On the top right, that's me in later years taking some new NASA employees through the neutral buoyancy simulator. Top side, lower left is again our neutral buoyancy simulator divers, of which I got to be one. And the lower bottom or center of the bottom there, that is the partially the Spacelab J crew that we were up at a shrine in Japan on top of one of their mountains there, and so. It was a great. I was the training manager of that flight. It took about 4 or 5 years of my life. I spent in total of about a year over in Japan, training the crews, and it was the NASA career was really a wonderful opportunity for me.
One of the things that I found really interesting and serendipitous, Homer, is that you were about to retire from NASA when the whole Rocket Boys phenomenon happened and you had a whole second career. But many folks don't know that there was actually a really well-received book right before Rocket Boys became the phenomenon that it is. So if you could just briefly touch on the beginning of your writing career.
Yeah, I always wanted to write, and as Roy said, we had a newspaper, and I actually ended up in Colwood, and I ended up writing a column in the newspaper down at Virginia Tech. So I just had I had a real desire to learn how to write, and so when I came back from Vietnam, I became a scuba instructor. I started diving on shipwrecks, and I ended up writing articles about diving on these wrecks for Skin Diver magazine and Sport Diver magazine and so on. And along the line, I ended up being one of the first divers aboard these German U-boat wrecks off North Carolina. And I realized that there was a great story there. I did a lot of research, a lot of diving, even lived in Germany for a few years so I could interview the U-boat crews. And ultimately that led to, it was a military history bestseller in 1989. Called Torpedo Junction, and it's still in print, amazingly enough. So I have to tell real quick, while I was researching Torpedo Junction and writing articles about the German U-boats, the submarines, I got a call from an insurance broker up in Maryland who was also wanted to write about submarines, and he had read my articles and wanted to talk to me about it. And pretty soon I figured out he wanted to write about nuclear submarines. I didn't know anything about it, so I kind of blew him off, and he went away. His name was Tom Clancy, and so
he did okay.
So The Hunt for Red October came out right before Torpedo Junction. We ended up with the same publisher, Naval Institute Press, for both those books.
Wow. Homer Hickam and Roy Lee Cook joining us today on the virtual Rocket Boys Festival. We do have questions that are coming in via our Facebook live stream and YouTube stream. And if you have a question, be sure to send it in. The virtual Rocket Boys Festival will go today until 2 p.m. Eastern, tomorrow 11 to 2 Eastern, and Thursday 11 to 2 Eastern. And Roy Lee, this first question is for you. It's from Amy. And Amy says, or asks, she says, it seems like the coal companies really held the employees and families hostage. Once you were in, there weren't a lot of options on getting out. What are your thoughts on this? Is that how you remember it, Roy Lee?
Well, there's probably some truth to that, but not in our case. We, in a typical coal mining town with a scrip that you could only spend at the company store, you lived in company housing, you went to the company doctor, and in our case, we had also a company dentist and a company barber, if you will. And we had our own company church, if you will. So in a way, that there's some truth to that story. However, in the case of Colwood, that wasn't the feel of things. The feel of things was that if you wanted to have a career in mining, the opportunity was there for you. And they would see that in a lot of cases, they would say that they would even help you with your education. I know when my father died when I was 13 years old, and I thought that the idea of college was gone forever. Although fortunately I had several family members that were college graduates, but Mrs. Mahoney, one of our school teachers, Mr. Watkins, our school principal, set me down when I was in high school and said, college is within your grasp. And a career, either here in Colwood, Coretta, or elsewhere, is for you. And so I never felt like that we were entrapped. But I do believe that if you looked at the broad spectrum of coal mining communities in Southern West Virginia or Appalachia in general, you might say, well, they really had a tough time getting out. I just don't believe it happened in Colwood.
Yeah, it's Roy Lee is absolutely right about that. If I can just chime in, Colwood was kind of a model town, but again, during the Rocket Boys era, you could start to see it fraying around the edges a little bit. And we have to remember that it wasn't more than 30 years or so, 30 or 40 years before that there were huge actually, labor wars, Union wars in southern West Virginia, the Battle of Blair Mountain, where machine guns were brought out by the Army and everything. It was awful. There were a lot of vestiges of that still around, and some of the coal towns were very, very rough, and it must have seemed like, that they were trapped. But Coalwood, again, Mr. Carter and Captain Laird tried to make Coalwood into a model town. And they did to a great extent. But when we went off to Big Creek High School and saw the other kids from some of the other coal camps in the area, we realized that Coalwood was a little unique in how it was organized and how much spirit that we had in that little town.
You can still visit the town of Coalwood today in McDowell County, West Virginia, and you'll see the Welcome to Coalwood, home of the Rocket Boys sign. But much of what you both remember from the town of Coalwood is no longer there. However, there's a photo there on the right of the Beckley Exhibition Coal Mine. And around that exhibition coal mine, not only do you get an opportunity to go into the mine, you can tour a company town as it was in the days of Homer and Roy Lee. It's right there off the interstate, and that's Theater West Virginia, and the Rocket Boys Festival executive director Scott Hill in that photo as well. And so we encourage you, if you're anywhere in the Mid-Atlantic, to swing by and visit Beckley, West Virginia, the Beckley Exhibition Coal Mine. A question for you, Homer, from Dan, who asked, how did you handle recovery of your rockets? Did you have parachutes in your rockets, or was it lawn dart recovery? How did you find them? Which is a great
lawn dart is a good description. Quentin and I principally were altitude junkies, and we didn't want to add any payloads. We wanted to get it just as high as we could possibly go. And it kind of depends on what part of our the Rocket Boys development was. We started out with small rockets, didn't go that high. Ultimately, we ended up with these big Zinco Shine steel rockets that went miles. And so it was basically sharp-eyed Billy, had really good eyes and could see these things coming in. And when they hit pretty hard, so you could hear where they went. Invariably, they hit a rock or a boulder. Right beside it was dirt, where they could have done the lawn dart thing, but instead they hit right on a rock, and that bent the steel, so we couldn't use it again. Also, the later one stunk. The zinc dust and sulfur, that sulfur smell was awful. And so invariably we were able to track these things down.
Many folks, of course, Homer, think of you as the author of Rocket Boys, don't realize how many bestsellers you've written, and their book covers for just some of them. Clearly, Rocket Boys has to have a special place in your heart. Which of those books that you see up on that screen right now are you the most proud of in terms of the craft of writing?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that Rocket Boys is a book I'm going to be remembered for. And I did suffer a little bit writing that book in that I had to go, I started, the way it all came about was I wrote a short article for Smithsonian Air and Space magazine about the Rocket Boys time. And it was very short and didn't include a lot of things that happened. But it was so popular, that's why I ended up writing Rocket Boys. I had New York publishers who knew about Torpedo Junction, and also immediately I started hearing from Hollywood producers, and they wanted to know if I was going to write a book about the time when I was a Rocket Boy, and I said, well, I guess I am now. And so I had to start digging into try to figure out how to write this book, and I had a lot of false starts before I was able to actually figure out that the only way this book was going to work was to tell it as if it was that boy, 14 through 17-year-old Sonny Hickam, had to tell this story. So I had to get inside that boy's head. I hadn't been that boy for a long, long time. And so that was difficult, to get back inside of his head and to tell it, because it was kind of in a way, it was a poignant story. It's a father-son story, basically. And it's about a boy who desperately wanted the approval of his father, and but never quite got it. So I had to be that boy again. I guess the book that I most enjoyed writing is that one that's shown now, beside Rocket Boys, and that's carrying Albert home, because that's the story of my parents long before I was born. My brother and I were born, and they were just young kids, young married kids. And my mom ended up with a pet alligator there in West Virginia, and they decided to carry him home and had lots of adventures on the way. So it was fun writing that book.
If you're interested in picking up one of Homer's books, of course, they're all available online, but we always recommend you go to homerhickam.com/bookshop, because you can have any of Homer's books personalized for you. And if you're a writer, we have writers' workshops coming up in the virtual Rocket Boys Festival, both today and tomorrow. And on Thursday, we actually have a Business of Books panel featuring 3 publishers. And if you're an author and you want to find out how the publishing business works, be sure to join us for that. Our next session begins at noon Eastern today, and that session is all about the movie October Sky. And Homer and Roy Lee will be there with us, along with a couple of the actors from the movie October Sky. Roy Lee, was that the first time, I'm assuming, you'd ever been on a movie set? And if so, what surprised you about the way they do things in Hollywood?
I take the Fifth Amendment on that.
Come on now.
Yes, I was able to attend the filming, thanks to my good friend Sonny. The thing that impressed me the most was the professionalism that is just surrounds the entire movie making industry. You know, we hear of all the bad things, the bad publicity here, there, and the other of things but the majority of the people that work in the film industry are true professionals. And secondly, they treated us with great kindness, because we were in their way. There was no way that we couldn't be in the way. But yes, it was a great experience, and I'll never forget it at all.
And it didn't hurt that in the movie they had this kid that looked like, Robert Redford or James Dean playing Roy Lee Cook in the movie. That all worked out.
Didn't hurt
well.
at all. And I will tell you, I've used that for the last 20 years.
Believe me, we know. Homer Hickam and Roy Lee Cook, our guest in the virtual Rocket Boys Festival. So, Homer, you've gone on to have this long career as a writer. Prior to that, a long career with NASA as an engineer. You served your country admirably in Vietnam. You were a Rocket Boy who won the National Science Fair. What's left to conquer for you? What do you still want to accomplish? Because that's the makings of a pretty doggone good life.
Well, Burke, I still like to write, and hopefully I'll write till the last day that I'm alive. And I have a lot of things going. I'm also out on the board for the United States Space and Rocket Center. That's Space Camp, the famous Space Camp. And we've been going through a lot of turmoil because of COVID and not being able to fully operate. So I've been very much involved with that over the last few years. And also the vice president was nice enough to call me and ask me to be on the National Space Council. And I agreed to that. And it looks like we're going back to the moon. And I'm really, really happy about that. So it just seems like that life is still very full. And, the thing, the Rocket Boy story just seems to work. I have to always go back to that. I am, I get to be on the National Space Council, and I get to be on the board of the Space and Rocket Center. And I also get to be a writer. I get to be, all the things that I am today because of that living that life back in Colwood during that era when we built rockets. Just touched the hearts and souls of people around the world, and I'm grateful and still very astonished about that. And of course, I've had a lot of opportunity to peel that onion back and try to figure it out. And it just seems like that everybody that comes to this story finds something in it that that either inspires them or reminds them of something in their lives, and it just touches them in the way it's whether or not it's a student trying to figure out what they want to do with the rest of their life, and then they can look at these boys in this little coal camp in Southern West Virginia back in the 1950s. He said, we want to do this and we're going to do it. And then we did it, building rockets and going off to the National Science Fair, or people that maybe have struggled with their parents. And they can read about some of the struggles within my own family dynamic. And I didn't hold back on what was going on there. And then also just the friendship that Roy Lee and I had, and the other Rocket Boys and everybody in our school. And I just keep encouraging young people to make these friends. Be careful who your friends are. Get friends that we're going to help you, and also are going to love you and take care of you, and you can take care of them. So it's very important. Also family. The fact is that no matter what's going on in your own family, that is where you live, there are lots of different kinds of families, and that family can include folks like the Rocket Boys. When you get together, your school is a family, your church is a family. So there are lots of families out there, and you want to be a member of the one that nurtures you and encourages you to be the best that you can be.
Roy Lee, we've got time for a couple of more questions, and they're coming in, but I want to sneak one in for you, and that is, from your vantage point, what is it about the story of something that you boys did all those years ago that resonates with people across the planet? As Homer mentioned, there are folks in far, far away places you would think would have nothing in common with a story about a bunch of boys that grew up in a coal camp in West Virginia that decided to set off rockets. Why do you think that story resonates with so many people of different ages and ethnicities just across the board?
Well, let me answer it this way. Because of the book and the movie, I've had the opportunity to speak all across the United States, big colleges, big universities, libraries with 12 people, whatever. The thing that amazes me is that no matter where I am, and I extend that across the world now, that everyone can seem to identify with some aspect of that period of our lives. And that could be, maybe they had immigrant parents or grandparents. It may be that they were living in semi-poverty or worse, that they had issues all through their lives that they couldn't overcome and did overcome. So, and a lot more people than I could even count have told me that they too built rockets back in the late 1950s, early 60s. It's just that the story has such a common thread for everyone. I'm not a religious person, but I can almost say, okay, you read the first 4 books of the New Testament, and you have all those common things about them, but all of them are different. Well, that's the way that the whole world is. We have a lot of things in common, more things than we believe, and yet we are different.
I love that. Time for one more question, Homer, before we have to move on to our next session. And this question comes from Jenny, and she says, hello, Homer and the Rocket Boys. You inspire me to work hard. What advice would you give students who would like to pursue a career in aerospace engineering?
Oh, well, aerospace engineering. Well, of course, in that case, you need to make good grades in high school so you can get in engineering school, and you just need to pay attention to what the good ones are. I mean, there are a lot of good aerospace engineering schools across the country, really. I also would say that if you want to get a job in the space business, you don't necessarily have to be an aerospace engineer anymore. It has opened so much that these days we see students from just all aspects of academia working in the space business. So marketing, business, accounting, everything is happening. And you also don't have to be an aerospace engineer. You can be a mechanical engineer, industrial engineer, chemical engineer. So there's a lot of aspects to that. Ultimately, though, if you want to be an aerospace engineer or any kind of engineer, you got to plan on, college is going to be difficult academically, and you've got to be willing to really be serious about your studies to get out the other side of that. But ultimately, it's very rewarding. I like to say, if it was easy to be an engineer, everybody would be an engineer, and so we're obviously all not, and that's not entirely true. But thanks for the question, and good luck on your space career.
One of the things that inspires so many people about the Rocket Boys story is it really does show that no matter where you're from and how humble your beginnings, you really can aim high and get anywhere you want to go. Roy Lee Cook and Homer Hickam, our special guest on this conversation with the Rocket Boys, and this is the very first session of our virtual Rocket Boys Festival. Come back and join us at noon Eastern today when Homer and Roy Lee will be back with some cast members from the movie October Sky. Homer and Roy Lee, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Bert.
Thank you.
And thank you, wherever you're watching from today. We appreciate you being here at noon Eastern. It's more of the virtual Rocket Boys Festival.